weep. For ages, no one but myself has held the light. Since first these mountains came, I alone have supported it, watched it, protected it. For if its flickering gleams die out, with them fails the light in the souls of men. We have never broken faith with man, nor with one another. And through the dim ages that have passed, when even our names were used to curse our brother, we silent seven have loved those who have betrayed us, served those who have denied us, and illumined those who have ridiculed us. Do thou likewise, for thou art no longer one of earth. I go to other works. Slowly the white-robed figure turned and walked away over the crunching snow, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. The watching pilgrim saw the feeble figure with its flowing beard, leaning heavily upon its staff, reach the very edge of the great cliff that rose from the valley below. Then the old man glided off into the sky, and with one last wave of the hand, passed gradually from sight amidst the stars of the firmament. It seemed that the lights of heaven shone brighter as he vanished among them, while the beacons on the mountains swayed and gleamed with a more glorious splendor. The pilgrim, filled with the radiance of his ideal, stood holding the lamp, his heart filled with purest sentiments and noblest purposes. He felt the majesty and the power that comes to one of the guardians of creation. The greatest and grandest in his nature spoke. The unselfish purpose of his labor thrilled him with life and hope. So he stood, the winds and the snows beating against him, great rumblings and roarings as of avalanches shooting down the mountainside, the crackling of glaciers and the howl of wolves broke the silence of his vigil. The hours passed. His arm grew weary, and he too swayed upon his staff with fatigue. But for reasons unknown, he could not lower the light. His fingers seemed fastened to the lamp, which glowed steadily in spite of his trembling arm. The chill of the snow came upon him, which only those know who have faced death amidst these silent, silvery wastes. A great fear by degrees invaded the heart of the pilgrim. Must he stand upon the mountain top forever? Would that night never have an end? Would the sun never shine again? The years rolled on, and ages were counted with the dead. But still the watcher, now old and gray himself, held the light upon the mountain top. But it was no longer with exultation in his heart, no longer for love of his task. His eyes were fixed longingly on the valleys below. His mind fashioned again and again pictures of the things he had known. Smiling faces of those he had left behind forever kept forming in the reeling mists which eternally surrounded him. He had begun to feel what it was to be apart. He was alone in a great silence, broken only by nature's sounds. He prayed that he might hear a human voice. His mind reeled, his brain grew hazy, and there was but one thought. He must leave that fearful place. He could not, would not, stand there through all eternity. He had not the strength to face the lonely, friendless ages which stretched out before him. Slowly his agony consumed him, until he raved at the very light he bore. Dying for friendship and love, solitary on the mountaintop, he cursed the very hour that had brought him into being. Little by little the flame in his hand grew dim as the spark of truth in his own soul died, until even the friendliness of its warming glow was denied him. Yet he could not escape. He could not move. He must remain with his self-appointed task. He prayed unto God for mercy. He begged that the powers of darkness release him. But still he stood there alone in the fields of snow, bearing aloft the light which grew feebler every day. At last the great despair seized him, the despair that many have felt, the helplessness, the hopelessness without end. He pitied the lonely watcher whose place he had taken. He was conscious of the gray beard on his own cheek. He thought of the years of life which he felt were wasted. Then his eyes turned to the other mountains, on whose peaks the light still gleamed, and in spite of his great anguish, his heart went out to them. Suddenly, after what seemed an eternity, his soul was filled with joy, and his life welled up again. For returning through the sky, he saw the white-robed form of the silent watcher. Like a drifting shadow of night, the aged figure walked across the arch of heaven, and finally placed his sandaled foot upon the crunching snow of the mountain, and staff in hand reached the side of the lonely one. My son, through Cosmos has come the call. Thou art not strong enough to carry the burden that thou wouldst. Too soon thou camest up the mountain, but it is still within thy power to choose. Wilt thou keep the light? Wilt thou be true to it through the ages? Oh, Father, I cannot. It is so lonely, nothing to think of, no one to talk to. If I stay longer, I shall go mad. Already my eyes have seen things not of earth, strange creatures, visions of delirium. The solitude, the silence, the darkness speaks to me with 1,000 tortured tongues. Oh God, I cannot stay. Father, take the light, lest it go out. The old man grasped the lamp, and as his fingers closed over its handle, the dying spark gleamed forth with renewed life, while the rays streamed out again to every corner of the world. The broken-hearted one, relieved of his burden, fell disconsolate at the feet of the aged philosopher. A moment later he rose with one idea in his mind, to escape from that terrible place. With his face between his hands, half crazed with terror and despair, he rushed headlong down the mountain. He even feared to turn back and look at the light, but at last he found courage to do so, and the tears came to his eyes as he saw the lonely figure of the silent watcher, his long gray beard still lying upon his chest, his head bowed upon his staff, his right hand holding aloft the light of the world. Oh, Father, he sobbed, I would that I could stay. Now I know what you have suffered. I know what the lonely ones have endured. I know the price that must be paid for the saviors of the world. But I cannot stay. I am not ready. I have not the understanding which would fill the emptiness of my solitude. Turning, he dashed, half running, half falling, heedless of cliff and gully, down into the mist that hid the world below. It seemed days before he reached the village he had left, but when he did so a cry burst from his lips. Happy faces no longer thronged the street, laughing voices no longer rang. The hamlet was deserted. Only a heap of ruin remained. So he wandered forth over hill and plain, searching for those he had loved. But during the ages he had stood upon the mountain peak, all whom he had known had passed away. The things that to him had once been dear were now but shams and follies. Although he had returned to the world, he was not of the world, for his soul was still on the mountain top, holding the light. For years he searched, but he could neither find the happiness he sought, nor the mountain that touched the sky. He could not find the 7 lights that gleamed from their ragged cliffs, though now he played for them as fervently as once he had begged to be freed from their service. At last, upon a dusty roadway, which for many years he had been traveling, the lonely pilgrim sank to rise no more. Broken in mind and body, aged with sorrow and suffering, the soul within at last waited liberation. A fellow wanderer on the great path found him there, the last spark of light still gleaming faintly in the dying form. "Brother," whispered the pilgrim, his eyes a far-away look in them as he gazed into the darkness of the night, "can you see above you 7 lights shining in the sky on the crests of the eternal mountains?" The wayfarer turned and looked. "No, I can see nothing," he answered, holding the dying form in his arms. "I can," whispered the feeble voice. The expiring man held out his arms to the sky, and half rising, his face illuminated with divine glory, he cried out, "Father, Father, I come back to carry the light. Go again to the stars that call you with their beckoning lanterns in the sky. Tell them you need never return, for this time I shall not fail." The form sank back, while somewhere on the crest of the mountains, a spirit that at last had climbed the heights took again the light to hold it forever, its rays bright with the glory of his own unfolded soul.